Welcome everyone to Inside Jerry's Brain. The creator of the world's largest mind map, digital brain, shows us his mind. Jerry, thank you so much for joining. Before I pass things off to you, I just want to introduce Jerry in case he's a little bit modest during this session. Jerry is an acclaimed tech analyst and futurist. He is founder of a think and do tank called Rex, all about the relationship economy. He is on record and audited by our brain stats of starting a brain 18 years ago with 288,000 thoughts and 500,000 links. And yes, if you want proof, we'll show you his stats. And I think with that, I'm going to pass things over to you, Jerry. I do want to let you know, for those of you that just joined in, we plan on having a very interactive Q&A. So for those of you who have questions or haven't seen Jerry's brain before and have a million questions on why it got started or have been into Jerry's brain, it's all relevant, and we will have multiple points where we will be posing these questions to Jerry. So your Q&A panel is right below the attendee and polling question. Feel free to chat those questions in, and we'll try to get to as many of those as possible. And I think with that, Jerry, I'll go ahead and let you share your screen and pass things over to you.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. I'm going to do a kind of a gentle introduction to me and to the brain, assuming that some of you, probably in the minority, are experienced users of this piece of software called TheBrain, and the rest of you are pretty new to it. So I'll start gently, which probably means I'm going to go too fast anyway. 18 years ago, as Shelley was saying, I was a technology industry analyst in New York writing about the tech business, and I was there when Silicon Alley was becoming Silicon Alley. I was kind of at the 50-yard line and influencing a lot of what was happening in the dot-com days, the early dot-com era, when the internet first shows up and everybody's trying to figure out what's going to happen. And in the middle of all that, this little company comes by and shows me a product called TheBrain. And I have a really strong memory of the meeting. And Harlan, the inventor of TheBrain, sat down next to me with his laptop, and then he opened the laptop, and I saw this thing, which I'm about to give you a tour of. And I thought, wow, okay, that's exactly how my brain works, the wet one that's on board. So I wrote about them back then. I invited them to present at our annual tech conference, which back then was one of these tech launch events that startups wanted to be at. And then I started using the software a month, I think, before it shipped to the general public. I could not have suspected back then that 18 years and a couple months later, because December of 2015 was the actual 18-year anniversary, so 18 years and a couple months later, that I would still, in fact, be using this piece of software, that it would have influenced my life so much, and some of the things I'm about to tell you about sort of ways in which it has, I think, sharpen my ability to think and remember and participate in different ways. So I'll give you some examples of that. What I'm showing you right now is how I usually have my desk arranged. So I have my brain occupying the right 5/6 of the screen, and then on the left I have my browser, which is usually Chrome. So I have my browser basically occupying the same real estate, but overlapping on the left. So browser's always flush left, brain is always flush right. And the reason for that is that it makes it really easy for me to feed my brain. And I'll do that from this page in just a second. But let me click back and go back to my brain. The brain, every node in the brain is called a thought. So here Malcolm Gladwell is a thought. Notice that when I mouse over Malcolm Gladwell, it highlights all the things that Malcolm is connected to. But notice that Malcolm is only connected to those things through these three little circles called gates. So one of the genius features of the brain that makes it different from everything else out there is that you have to connect either up, down, or sideways. And there isn't sideways to the right. There's only sideways to the left. And you can interpret those connections any way you want to. So up could be anything, and I tend to think of up, for example, as categories. So Malcolm Gladwell is an essayist, one of my favorite writers, despite his controversy. He writes for The New Yorker. He's a science popularizer. And I'll just click on one of those. So I'm going to click on science popularizer. When I click on a thought, that thought rotates into the plex, it becomes the active thought in the middle, and then you see everything that's around it. and then whatever we were just on scrolls by here on the left. So this down here is sort of like your breadcrumbs as you click through your brain. So now I can click back on Malcolm Gladwell without having to find him on screen, and now we're back where we were. So I just went to Science Popularis and came back to Malcolm. So I always put books under their authors. So Malcolm here has written enough books that, in fact, I created a sub-thought called Gladwell's Books, which I'll go to in just a second. But first, I also want to explain that anywhere you see a little fave icon next to a thought, that means that there is a link. So the link down here is a Wikipedia link to Malcolm Gladwell. And what I tend to do is I put, if somebody has a Wikipedia page about them, that becomes their primary link. If they don't, my next preferred is LinkedIn. If they don't have that, sometimes I do Facebook or nothing at all. So I kind of have a little mental hierarchy that I've developed over time. And one of the things you do when you start using the brain is you develop what I call little cliches, ways of doing things. And if you're consistent about your cliches, it really, really pays off over time. So one of my cliches is that I put books under their authors. But for example, I put service bureaus. So Malcolm is represented by the Lee Bureau, which is a speakers bureau. Here are other people represented, and this is a scrolling list. So there's the D's, there's Don Tapscott, James Surowiecki, another good author, Jane McGonigal. These people are all represented by the Lee Bureau, which is one of many speakers bureaus. So as you see, as I click around, this is a really great example of a very famous Ted Nelson saying from way back when, that everything is deeply intertwingled. But wait, if I click anywhere in the blue background, it puts my cursor in this little search bar down here, and I can say everything is deeply, and go to that quote. So here's everything is deeply intertwingled. It was said by Ted Nelson, who wrote a book called Possiplex, another book called Geeks Bearing Gifts, et cetera, et cetera. And this is just to show you that it's really easy not just to traverse through my brain or any brain, but to just jump any place you want, as long as you have some words that you're looking for. So it's not quite a search engine. It's more of a static context of what's going on. Let me go back to Malcolm, and let me show you what's sort of interesting about keeping some of this information in the brain. Now, let me go back up to Malcolm for a second. All these articles are either articles that Malcolm wrote or articles about Malcolm. In fact, there are some critiques of Malcolm Gladwell. So I have a thought called Critiques of Gladwell, and there's a bunch of things here as well. His Twitter handle is down here. So if I were to click on this link, if I click on any of these icons that show that there's a link, it launches my browser to that web page, whatever web page. Now let's go down to Gladwell's books. And there we will see, among others, The Tipping Point, which I have debriefed into my brain. So I want to show you what I did with The Tipping Point. In fact, I'm going to connect Critiques of the Tipping Point to Critiques of Gladwell just by doing that. There we go. So what I want to do now is show you what you can do with a book you liked. So in The Tipping Point, he talks about the magic number 150, why did hush puppies become a fad again, but then he has sort of the 3 rules of the tipping point. He calls it the law of the few, the power of context, and the stickiness factor. The law of the few, he talks about connectors, mavens, and salespeople. And under connectors, for example, he writes about Paul Revere, Roger Horchow, and Lois Weisberg, who just died, by the way. Lois Weisberg just recently passed away, and there was an obituary of her in the New York Times, which, as you might think, is in my brain right here. So Lois Weisberg, Chicago's cultural connector, dies at 90. And it mentions that she was profiled in this book. So I've got Lois under connectors in my brain, which is a couple layers under the tipping point, but you can see that all this stuff is really connected. Her son, by the way, Jacob Weisberg, is the managing editor of Slate magazine. So if I go back to the 3 rules of the tipping point, I can lead you back to one of my favorite thoughts in my brain. And I'm going a little 201 instead of 101 here, but for those of you who are experienced brain users, go to my brain at jerrysbrain.com on the web, or there's an app in the App Store called Jerry's Brain with my face on it, of all strange things. And find this thought called enumerated wisdom. And enumerated wisdom will be evident once I start showing you what it is. So here's 3 ways to improve your results. the 4 cores of credibility, the 4 domains of intelligence, the 4 F's of the limbic system. Now, as you might expect, each of these is connected to what it is. So the limbic system, so the 4 F's are feeding, fighting, fleeing, and reproduction, which if you think about it is another F. The 5 trends shaping the future of work, 5 ways to think about ethics. And I don't always have the debrief down here. Sometimes I use the notes field down here to write about them. In this case, I've done both. 5 ways, Kirk Hansen says there are these 5 ways to think about it, utilitarian, rights, etc. So I put them down here, and I should have, depends on whether I have enough time, I should have connected the utilitarian approach to utilitarianism, which is connected to another fun thought, isms. And this is just A through C. This is notice there's a scroll bar down here. So if I scroll across, you'll see all these isms: elitism, freeganism, incrementalism, isolationism, naturalism, nudism, originalism. Oh wait, originalism should have Antonin Scalia, who just passed away. So if I go back up to Scalia, we'll have him. And I should connect him actually to originalism, which he wasn't before. So I've just fixed that. It's really easy to edit your brain. You're not in edit mode, then in publish mode. You're always working in it so that you can work. Now what I'd like to do is add 2 things I want to do next, and then start looking for what questions you have. One is I want to add something to my brain and show you what I do when I add something, which is basically how I work every day. There's kind of a flow of things coming past, and what I'm doing is I'm picking out of that flow the things that are interesting enough for me to remember, and I create a stock, a reservoir, a curated context of those things in my brain. So one thing that came through in the flow was this link. There's a fellow named Danny Yee, and for years and years I've been receiving reviews of books that Danny writes. And I don't know why, but usually they come 2 at a time every 3 or 4 weeks. The breadth of topics is insane, and his reviews are deep regardless what the topic is. So they'll be deep in science, they'll be deep in sociology, they'll be deep in history. He seems to know everything. So what I generally do is I follow his Amazon link to where the book is. And this is about Confucianism as a world religion. So here's the tag that he put in. So I will go into my brain now and find where I want to put it, which is Confucianism. And I just clicked on the blue background, which put my cursor in the search bar, and there's Confucianism. I don't hit return, and all of the thoughts that contain the phrase Confucianism show up automatically. So you can see I could have picked something else, but I picked Confucianism. And what I'm going to do now is pretty simple. The reason I've overlapped the windows this way is I'm going to grab the fave icon and drag it into my brain and let go. That's it. And what's going to happen is the brain is going to go find the book and then pick up the title and the URL. So here's the URL. The URL is fine, but the title, if there's a colon in the title, the brain usually gets that a little bit wrong. So I'm going to copy that out of here, paste it up here, and then clean up the end here. So it was written by Anna Sun. I'm going to cut her out and then paste her back as the author, because I always put authors above their works. And I'm going to wait a moment in case there's already an Anna Sun in my brain. My brain will tell me so, and if not, it won't return anybody, so now I can just hit return. So now I've put the book in. The book is in under Confucianism, and I can get rid of the Amazon page, but I'd like to put Danny Yee's review in, so I'm going to do that as well. And my habit with Danny's reviews is I say Yee's review of, and then, and this may or may not amuse you, I connect it back to Danny Yee. So here's Danny Yee in my brain, and you'll see that it now brings in all of the reviews of his over the years that I've put in my brain. And he has a blog at dannyreviews.com that he subtitles Ramblings of a Pathologically Eclectic Generalist, which I must say is a super wonderfully accurate description of this guy. And so if I scroll to the right, you'll see more, and it's all Yee's review of something. So Yee's review of Trans-Saharan Africa in World History. Here's the book, and it's about the Sahara, and I actually don't have it very well linked, so I should do more of that and pay more attention. So here's an article about Africa, So why don't I connect it to Trans-Saharan Africa in world history? So now I've just connected this book, which wasn't very linked, up to articles about Africa. Another habit I have, when a thought gets messy, so Africa obviously will have a lot of things under it. When a thought gets messy, I almost always first create a subarticle, articles about X. In this case, articles about Africa, and I color that thought yellow, always yellow, so that it stands out from all these things that are just in alphabetic order beneath the current active thought. So I wanted to show you first how I put something in the brain. So we've done that. And then I wanted to take you to a thought that's important to me. It's called Lessons from My Brain. It's things I've learned from 18 years of using this piece of software, for which I'm really grateful. It's really, I find that my unaided recall on things is much better than it would normally be, because every time I'm in here gardening, adding, changing, messing with things, I'm actually refreshing the neural pathways here. So I can remember authors and their books. I can remember, the tipping point, the law of the few, the stickiness factor. All that sticks a lot better. And if I were a student doing homework and I was feeding my brain all the time, the mere act of feeding the brain, of thinking, okay, what is it? Where does it fit? How do I put it in? Is this expressed as crisply as I can? All those things basically help lodge the thing in the other brain, in your onboard brain, better. So here, let me just talk about a couple of these, and then I'll see if there's any questions. Otherwise, I'll keep adding a few more things and going back into some of these lessons.
All right, great, Jerry. Well, we do have a number of questions coming in, so I'll just start from the top. If now we'll jump into those. And I love the idea. First of all, I'd love to say about cliches. So I'd love to learn more about your other cliches, books to authors. I think that could be very helpful to new users. But before we get into that, I'm going to just fire off some of the questions that started in the Q&A with the users. And the first one is from Ken. How do you focus and understand the thousands of items?
There's lots of ways I can interpret the question. So
Yes.
I know. Partly it's if there's a person in my brain, if I've put a human in my brain, it doesn't mean I've met them. It doesn't mean it's a personal relationship. Where on LinkedIn, if I connect, if I approve a link or I request a link on LinkedIn, it's usually because it doesn't mean I've met them face to face, but I know them. So I'm putting a whole lot of stuff that crosses the threshold of interest in my brain, and because I'm curious about everything, there's a lot of room for everything. And what I love, and I don't know how to do this in any other tool, is that I've been able to put everything in a single brain. So the brain we're looking at right now that I'm sharing with you is the same one that I started 18 years and a couple months ago. So one of the ways that I can focus is a property that, in fact, here we go. This is actually a wonderful how your question is fitting what I was about to show you. My brain has something I call local structure, which means at every screen, it's not overwhelming, even if it has a lot of things. So here's quite a bit of text. This is the sibling thoughts. There's a bunch of stuff on screen. But one screen at a time, if I remember that the things above are probably hierarchically superior, the things below are child or inferior, and the things parallel are either opposites or very closely related, like husband-wife or north and south. If I keep that in mind, it's actually pretty easy to keep focus. And almost every other mind mapping tool I've ever seen either splays everything out in a big circle, and your eyes simply can't parse the big circle, and when you add things to the circle, they're no longer in the same place as before, or they have like a rubber band effect, and the brain has an alternate way of viewing that lets you do that rubber band where you have tension between topics that matters, which is interesting for displaying some kinds of things, but I find not useful for navigating through information at all. So that may not actually answer your question, but it's my best attempt.
I think it's a great answer, and in fact, it kind of speaks to the brain's secret sauce, which is the dynamic reconfiguration. Every time I click on a thought, whether I'm navigating at jerrysbrain.com or in your app or on my own brain, and it's going to trigger all related pieces of information, but all the relationships in the first degree. So even though you have a brain of 288,000 thoughts, you can see here, I'm not seeing all 288,000 thoughts at once. I'm seeing, what is related to the active thought lessons from my brain. And that really does enable that level of scalability to enable us to have, big thinkers like Jerry put all his ideas in a single brain, which really isn't possible with other technology. And I guess that there's a question, a follow-up from Ken was, and you did mention that this is the same brain online, but I'll just pose the question since it was asked. Is this brain that you're showing us now the same as jerrysbrain.com, or do you have a few private thoughts, or is just everything public and fully consumable to people that you're thinking about in this brain?
Excellent. So you triggered a couple different things. One is, before I ever saw the brain 18 and a half years ago, I thought I wanted a mind mapping tool that was more like the game of Go, where placement of everything relative to everything else really, really mattered. So I was thinking more rubber band display. The moment I started using the brain, I realized why that doesn't matter. You can't do that, because you can't put something in a space relative to everything else it's near. You can do it relative to one or two things, but not everything. And as you add a whole bunch of things, that context just goes crazy. Second point is, I don't ever want to see all my thoughts at once. It looks like a big ball of twine. And I've just taken us to a site called Visual Complexity, managed by Manuel Lima. And I'm like, 90% of the things on the Visual Complexity site are sexy and pretty, but not that useful. So I really care about visual presentation of information. That's part of the reason why I found the brain so useful. Then another thing is that if you, now and then you'll see a thought that's in red. Any thought that's in red is a thought that I have marked private. So I'm going to just, we're in an amnesic society, I'm going to mark it private. So now the thought turns red. I can check any thought in my brain as private, which means that when I publish it, other people won't see it, even though it's published into the brain. So if I log in as me and look at my web brain, I'll see all my private thoughts as well, but it has to be my ID. Less than 1%, I don't know how to count them, but less than 1% of all my thoughts are private. And I've created one separate brain once, many years ago, probably a decade ago. Somebody at a conference said, hey, can you just start a brain for us about the periodic table of elements? So I started, with the elements, atomic number, et cetera, and by the time I got to 5, I was like, wow, why would you want to have a separate brain for science or for this when as soon as you get to metals and rare earth metals, you need to talk about metallurgy and all those other things that matter, right? It's kind of crazy how everything is in fact deeply intertwined. And part of the fun is that, so here's metals, then there's post-transition metals, bismuth, iridium, et cetera, indium, and then there's a really nice book about the periodic table of elements by Oliver Sacks. In fact, that's not even the book. Uncle Tungsten. There we go. So this book is a fantastic book about the periodic table of elements. Why would I have multiple brains to do this? Sorry, long answer, but it triggered a whole series of cascading thoughts. Go ahead with the next one.
And that is great, because that is a philosophical question, and that's why we wanted to bring, Jerry on. He represents that classic big brain user, and it's really a testament to his thinking and to scalability, and we do have other blog articles on multiple brain. Matt Caton is a multiple brain guy, and we've had other big thinkers like David Allen that actually said, well, I couldn't put it all in one brain, and started creating separate brains. So, I think in general, to be honest, the creator Harlan did envision sort of the one brain, the all-encompassing brain. But
one brain to rule them all, that's what I say. One brain
to use them all, rule them all, exactly. And actually on that note, speaking of large brains, the next question from Michael is how do you decide which thoughts to pin? And that's where in a large brain, pins are absolutely essential for publishing and for your own use as well.
So the question is about these pins up here?
Yes. Why did you decide to pin these, and how do you make the decisions on what thoughts to pin?
I almost never change the pins. So every year I put the year up here because during the year, as things happen, as important events happen, I actually sit down and connect them to the year. So I can go back, for example, in 2015, this is what 2015 looked like from my seat in the world. So here's Black Lives Matter, the hashtag, and Walter Scott. Here's the dress. Remember, is it a gold and white dress or blue and yellow? Here's the Nepal earthquake. Here's the beginning of the election campaign that we're in right now. Caitlyn Jenner came out, Donald Trump does his Muslim thing, the dentist kills a lion, and we have internet vigilantism. So this one changes only once a year. I don't think I've changed any of the rest of the pins in years, partly because these are nice entry points for people coming into the brain. One of them is words I love. Intent, judgment, letting go, local structure, the thing I was just talking about. My belief system. So I happen to believe that everybody on Earth ought to publish what I call a belief snapshot. I should tell you what I believe to be true and why. So, I believe that people are born good. And there are people who think that people are born bad. There's plenty of philosophy around this, and you very quickly get into deep waters. But I actually think that people are born good, and we create socialization systems that destroy that. So all these things are up on my pin board, and they feel to me like long-lasting things. I probably don't maintain this one enough, the new and improved areas, and there's no automation in the brain really, so it's not like my brain is watching where I have added and gardened a lot lately and adding it to this category. I have to remember to do so. So this would be the most dynamic of thoughts up on my pin board, and I probably under-maintain it.
Great, and I love that section, 2016, with all the highlights of the year. It's
really cool to look back year after year.
Yeah, it's just fabulous. And in terms of, I guess, structure, Martin had a question. I've always, for over 8 years, loved the concept and associative functionality of the brain. The biggest challenge, however, is the change management required to move from left panel hierarchical pattern that is standard to almost every other product. Do you have any suggestions about how to make the change and have it stick?
Yeah. So the thing that I understood immediately was that the brain was different from a normal outliner or other kinds of things. And I was a user of More and Think Tank way back in the day. So More was created by Dave Weiner. It was an excellent outlining program. It came from Think Tank, which he also created. And here's the whole category of outliners. I loved outliners. And then when the brain comes along, I'm like, oh my God, this is so much more powerful. I call the brain 2.25D. It's not 3D. We don't have a y-axis. We're not flying through info. And my own perception is that 3D information management doesn't work. Simply breaks. You can't fly your way through information very easily. It doesn't work unless the information is dimensional somehow, naturally. So the quarter is, and now it's not as visible because on fast machines you can't tell the animation. But when I click on a new thought to make it the active thought, the text gets a little bit bigger and a little bit smaller. And Muriel Cooper would smile in her grave because she was all about how we sort of help manipulate text to make meaning. And so it looks like the text hopped up a little bit as it jumped. And that visual cue lets your brain know, oh, this isn't a strict outline or hierarchy. I can leap through to any place I want. And so this notion that I can link anything to anything, so I can create a spurious thought here. I'm going to connect lessons to my brain to neural networks, and it'll bring up all the thoughts I have that say neural networks. I've just made a spurious link. So this link didn't exist before. I just made it. And then I can just go here, highlight the link, two-finger click, and say unlink, and I've just broken that link. That it's that easy to do is really kind of mind-breaking. So you have to kind of treat this as a new space and as a non-hierarchical space. And there's local structure and a little bit of local hierarchy, but it's a multi-directed graph. I don't even know what the formal name of the data structure is. Anything can connect to anything, and not in a wild, crazy, out-of-control way. I hope that sort of addresses your question. But this is a different thinking space. The way Prezi for me is a different thinking space as well. I use Prezi a whole bunch. Prezi is sort of an ultimate zoomable whiteboard where you can put things and then create journeys through them that offer narrative functionality that is not really in the brain. So I use them in complementary ways.
All right, great. And speaking of, I guess, techniques, Stefan was asking, do you use tags and types in your brain?
So I'm a total Luddite. I use only one or two new features in the brain. I don't use types or tags, either of them. I use thoughts as tags, and tags are basically specialized thoughts, but they have a specialized role in the display that doesn't really work that well for me. So I use, for example, I have a thought called skeptical of, where I put technologies that I've been skeptical of over the years. Well, that's not the one.
And while you're looking for that thought, I think this is an interesting point, especially to our new users, because there is so much functionality in the brain. But I think what Jerry's brain also demonstrates is how far you can take the brain with, really, to be honest, all of our free features. I mean, you're using the parent, child, and jump to structure, 288,000 thoughts and 500,000 links, mostly connecting to web URLs, and just the parent, child, jump visualization with the web URLs can generate something like this is actually a really interesting use case scenario. And I did want to point that out, especially to our newer users that are like, well, what do I do with these types tags and all the other? Well, here's an example of one of the most sophisticated, data structures and most engrossing that I've encountered. And, he's basically sticking with parent-child thought and jump with the associative connections and all that, and linking to web URLs. So you can do a lot with just the core functionality. Now, of course, we have other seminars on tagging and typing and calendaring and stuff like that. But for sheer, I guess, knowledge management, link management, and visualizing relationships, I mean, that's the core functionality, at least for you, Jerry, wouldn't you say? Or
Totally. And I find that the bare bones functionality of the brain is magical. And I haven't found it any place else in any other thing. I can't do, in fact, I'll show you something right now that I sort of challenge anybody else to do with any other tool. And I just realized why I didn't find skeptical of is that it used to be spelled with a K until a friend of mine said, oh, you're misspelling skeptical. It's with a C. And then I changed a whole bunch of skepticals in my brain until I went and looked it up and found out that it's both ways. So skepticism is also not a skepticism right now. It's confusing. But the basic functionality, so for example, let me go to Andreessen Horowitz, which is one of the big venture firms in the Valley, right? So I'm jumping through the brain to Andreessen Horowitz. And I put this under useful starting points for understanding Jerry's brain, which should be in new and improved areas, and also good starting points. So this is their portfolio, right? These are the companies that they invested in. Not all of them. I don't make any claims of perfection or, this is not collectively exhaustive or anything like that. But they invested in Lyft. Well, so did Founders Fund, so did Mayfield Fund, so did Weathergage Capital. Wait, Mayfield Fund, what else did they invest in? Oh, they invested in FitMob. What did FitMob do? Oh, they do collaborative social fitness. Who else competed with them? Well, Runkeeper. Who invested in Runkeeper? Well, that was Spark Capital. They also invested in Bug Labs, Boxy, and Altius Education. What do you mean Altius? Oh, it's part of distance learning. You can't do what I just did in 30 seconds with any other tool. Not doable. And if you can, show me, send me email. I'm associate@gmail.com. Please, or tweet to me, at Jerry Michalski on Twitter. Love to have these conversations. But this is the magic of this tool, that I have been sort of patient over 18 years, but trust me, you don't have to have 288,000 thoughts in your brain to be happy. At 100, you'll be thinking, oh, that's pretty useful. And then you'll be starting to figure out some of the cliches that I mentioned earlier for yourself, right? You'll figure out little routines that work for you, and when they don't, you can just change them. You can just drag things around and move them.
All right, great. And I guess I love that you're getting into sort of your tech and VC area, because that sort of ties in, I guess, originally to Eve's question. She's asking, can you talk about how this helps you for work? And I guess I remember when you first started out, being a tech analyst, your tech taxonomy section, it's still a fabulous resource. And by the way, for all of you looking for venture capital or startups, you got to go to Jerry's Brain, because you'll just see all the tech analysts, the VC firms. It's just a great internet resource for all kinds of things. But to get back to that core question, and maybe this could tie into what you're doing at Rex, Jerry, Eve has asked, will Jerry show us how his brain helps him in his work? So maybe you could talk a little bit about your work and how the brain augments or facilitates that.
Oh my God, how many hours do we have to answer this one?
Great question, Eve.
Yeah, thanks, Eve. So I just went to the thought text taxonomy, which is an ancient thought. And the first two thoughts I put were business and private under Jerry, which was the very first thought in my brain. So we're here sort of close to the Big Bang in some sense. We're here in an area I never go back to. And I mean, sincerely, I started someplace. I never go back to the thought that's just labeled business. I never go back to the text taxonomy. What happens is a reporter would call, and I'd go to buddy lists. And as they were saying, hey, I'm doing a story about buddy lists, I would do exactly this, right? And here on this list are all the buddy lists, and I don't know that I've added any in recent memory, but these are all the buddy lists that I had heard of way back when, including all of the ones that went under. And one of the really cool things is that there's something called the Wayback Machine at the Internet Archive. So here's the Internet Archive, which is this lovely, fantastic site that is recording the web. They're basically scouring all the links on the web, storing them for posterity, which the Library of Congress doesn't do. In fact, they donate it to the Library of Congress. The archive is this fantastic thing which has a feature called the Wayback Machine, which, of course, is a tip of the hat to Mr. Peabody and the Rocky and Bullwinkle show, where they had a time travel device called the Wayback Machine. But you can put any broken or dead URL in the Wayback Machine, and the archive will tell you whether and on what days they scan the content of that website. So I never get rid of dead websites because the Wayback Machine helps me reconstitute them, and I want to know who tried and didn't make it. So Skype is a buddy list, but so is ScreenFire and Reuters Messaging and PresenceWorks and QQ and PIP and so forth. All the Nassim Taleb says that we never hear from the graveyard. We idolize the winners, the victors in all these contests, but we don't hear about the companies that failed. My brain has all the companies that failed. So a startup comes along and says, we're going to do group calendaring. And I say, awesome, really great that you're doing group calendaring. And some of them will be like, well, they're writing a sort of like, we invented this category. I'll be like, well, do you want to see how many of these companies have already come and gone? So here's some of the first generation web calendars. Here's the broader category of web calendars. Here's some subcategories of group calendaring, social calendaring. A lot of companies have tried to do this category. So just from the who's in here and also who invested in whom, which is, as you can see, not perfect information in here, but you can get an idea of where investment goes. But then I'll go to a very different thought. I have a thought called jobs replaced by automation and more, because this topic just keeps getting bigger. It's an incredibly hot topic. It was a hot topic for me apparently in 2014, and it has not ceased being a hot topic each year, so I should probably connect it to all those years. And certainly it's a hot topic this year, so let's actually connect it up to 2016 right this second. So here are all sorts of articles about what's happening in automation. So here's an article from the Wall Street Journal titled "Automation Makes Us Dumb." Here are job categories that are being automated. Baristas will go away because you can just push a button and get a nice cup of coffee. Checkout clerks were obsoleted basically by self-serve tellers. Clerks, bank tellers, the whole thing, they're kind of all here, so I can come back here and keep feeding this. And now this is one of the most complex screens you'll see in my brain, and every now and then I come back here and I think, well, okay, how do I make this a little more, how do I narrow it? So there's a bunch of people saying, well, hey, don't worry about it, automation won't be so bad. So there's some utopian visions of automation, why robots will always need us, robot overlords' job ceiling is exaggerated, et cetera, et cetera. It's all close together here as support of the opposite of this argument. But I've also got, why I believe that this is actually a huge problem. And what I do, actually, let me take that one more step. Is it here? Not there. So I believe that we're entering something I call a relationship economy. And I don't have to spell all the terms that I'm looking for. I believe we're actually entering something I call the relationship economy, which is kind of a rediscovery of the kinds of relationships that humans were in before. We knew how to be in relationship in communities. We knew how to be in relationship with the earth because we kind of knew that we lived on commons and that if we broke the commons, we would all die. And occasionally the extinction of civilizations is either from war with other cultures or their destruction of their commons. So there's a whole bunch of things about articles about the relationship economy, examples of the relationship economy in action. So here are, restorative justice, openness, peer-to-peer learning, the ex-president of Ecuador, the Free and Libre Open Society project he was in Uruguay. Mujica was Uruguay. This is from Ecuador. All these sorts of things are basically collected up so that when I need to think, gosh, what examples do I have that this is even happening in the world, I come here. And some of these are just big subcategories. So trust your employees isn't just a little phrase. It actually connects to Ricardo Semler and his company Semco, which is an absolute role model in the world for how to trust your companies. He's one of my favorite living speakers. Here's a fantastic interview with him, which is part of my Rex bibliography, which is another way I do this. So the relationship economy expedition is what I do, and there's a bibliography of videos, books, and you can kind of see this is a YouTube video because of the favicon. This is a book on Amazon. This is a post from somebody on TypePad. This is something from Harvard Business School, 5 Tips for Stranded Evangelists, for example. So it was written by Alexander Samuel, and it has a link from Harvard Business Review. All over the map there, but hopefully that gives you some ideas of how useful this is.
Yeah, that's great, and I love just that a newer area, a new speaker to look at. So I'm just making some notes to dive into these sections in your brain. And just a few comments. We have a comment from Demetria. A new user, have tried many on the market, in love with this product. This presentation gives me great ideas on how to dive deeper. Cheers, Demetria.
Thank you. Thrilled about that.
All right, great. And then actually 2 questions, one from George and one from Wellesley about mobile. So I'll just, does Jerry use the brain on the go with a mobile device? And Wesley says, do you try to use your brain in a mobile mode on the go? So sort of a snippet of different questions on what you do as far as mobile access for your brain if you use it. And I guess that would be a good segue into your app that is now available in iTunes as well.
Exactly. So what I'm showing now is the app on the iPad Mini 2. My own take is that on phones that the real estate is just a little tight for looking at thoughts and context. But on iPads or Android tablets, the brain is just beautiful. It's almost more beautiful than on a laptop. In particular, you can stand next to somebody and you can tap on things. When you double tap on a thought that has a link to it, it just launches your browser to it, and you can come back. It's all really simple and really crisp and right here. So I do use it on the road, but I do all my authoring, and this is just because of how the brain is right now, I do all my authoring on the laptop. So the brain that I'm using right here is the brain I feed all the time. And one of my frustrations is actually when I'm on the road, there's no simple way to harvest something good that I'm reading and drop it in my brain quickly. And I don't have gestures for it. I would love to be able to just do it with speech recognition and say, brain topic, add this there, and have it just sort of all be harvested and put in. That would be pretty fantastic. So just in case Harlan is listening.
All right, very good. And this is a question that popped up early. I'll ask it again. It's a great question asking from you. I know your answer, but Wesley's asking: is one brain better than multiple brains?
So I think if I were in a company and there was a lot of proprietary information I was putting into a brain and I had to segment it from other departments, if I were selling brains of knowledge to different domains and so forth, I can envision creating lots of different brains. But short of those pretty dramatic things, I don't see a lot of reasons for creating many different brains, because it turns out that everything is deeply intertwined. And there's a really big moment of joy and a little release of oxytocin in your head when you make a link like that. When you realize that these things are connected that you didn't think about as connected before. And at one point I was looking up vicious cycles, basically, in my brain, and I had it under feedback loops, but I also had virtuous circles in my brain under feedback loops, and I connected the two because it dawned on me, for example, that when Microsoft bundles all these apps together and then just starts shipping them as a unit, they basically kill off WordPerfect Office and Novell and a bunch of other, Lotus, right? They just kill them off. What was a virtuous cycle for Microsoft, which includes a lot of anti-competitive practices, was a vicious cycle for the others. These two things are completely linked. Everybody else in the market went down the toilet and just was destroyed. So that came from having all this stuff in one common context. And it's not something I've seen any other tool that lets me do.
All right, great. And Becky has a question about how large is the size of your brain file size, and a couple people are wanting to know how they can see the statistics of your brain. So if you want to talk about your brain size, how you manage your large brain on your computer, and then maybe give us a glimpse of your brain stats, that would be great.
Usually, I'm luckily on a faster machine now. Usually, running the brain stats takes a while, so I'm usually loath to run it. Shall I do it?
We can tweet that out actually too. I don't.
Let me just. I'm just going to run it, and we'll cross our fingers that it happens quickly here.
Okay.
So the brain file itself is, I don't know, 150 meg worth or something like that. Compresses down. It's big, but it's not gigantic. It has within the folders lots and lots and lots of small files where the links and other sorts of data are kept. So there's a lot of them. There's two ways that I sort of protect it. One is I periodically run a brain zip, which means the brain itself zips up all its files and creates one package, which I can then put somewhere into storage. But the other one is, and this one's actually more functional, I hit the sync button and I synchronize my desktop brain to web brain. So anybody who's going and looking at jerrysbrain.com or the app, you're looking at fresh data because every time I sync, I'm basically adding whatever I just saw to web brain. And that web brain is a fantastic backup. In fact, some years ago, there was a bit of a crisis where I had a disk corrupted, and I don't remember what, and I had lost a couple months' worth of data, but I went in and synced back from the server and got my data back. So that was pretty interesting. And I'm crossing my fingers that the stats complete shortly so I can show you how many thoughts. Last time I ran it was 288 or so thousand thoughts, linked by more than 540,000 links, all put in by me over these 18 years and 2 months.
Fabulous, and we can definitely tweet out that screenshot if we can't get the stats. Sometimes the GoToMeeting does slow down the processing on the machine. So I'll just continue with a few more questions. Ron has a question. Since Jerry uses a great number of links as opposed to importing copies or notes into the brain, does he have any issues with items, especially older ones, that are taken down or moved? So I guess it's more of an editing and maintenance question as far as linking to external web pages.
Yes, and you'll see the stats are up now. It completed.
Oh, great.
So I took a snapshot of it that I can send you.
So let's take a moment. Let's take a moment, everyone. So the proof is in the pudding. It is 288,540, not 288 thoughts we can see.
And 520,000 links, who knows how. I don't use notes a lot. As you can see, I use 0 tags. I only have one thought type, and that was just an experiment once long ago, so I don't use them. And I don't forget thoughts. I always delete them. I just get rid of them. I've never understood the forget status. So the question partly is something I was talking about a little earlier about the Wayback Machine, being able to find dead links. But then there's another question, which is sometimes links just move. And partly what happens is if I follow a link and it moved, I'll update it. I'll go back to the thought and just copy it from the browser and paste it in to where the old link was and update it. And that's pretty simple. And I do that all the time. One of the lessons, let me go back because I actually want to make sure I say this before we finish our whole webinar. One of the big lessons that I got from using the brain is that we are an amnesic civilization, that we don't have tools, we don't have tools for remembering stuff, that my being able to put things in context over time has actually helped me make sense out of what I think I know, what I don't know, has changed my mind on things, has helped me offer things to other people, etc. But the fact that we don't have many tools like this means that we, as a society, are much easier to manipulate. We're much easier to convince about stuff because we're not pinning down what it is we think about these topics, whether it's what should we do about immigrants, should police wear body cams, do we crank up the volume on grade school education when it's not working, or do we change the model entirely? And what you get, right now we're in the middle of a very amusing and scary political campaign in the US in the 2016 primaries. And you can see that when you can't fact check and pin people down, candidates are perfectly happy to keep repeating stuff that in fact is completely untrue and runs counter to the evidence, et cetera, et cetera. Then there's a meta conversation to be had also about whether evidence and facts are really what convince people. That kind of stuff is in my brain as well. But I think that without ways of sharing with one another what we know and how it works, we're really at a loss and much easier to manipulate.
Wow, that's great. And I love how current the brain is, and how, this gives us all an idea. You're working things out, even automation, is it good for society or not? There's that diverse perspective. And yes, with decision management, elections coming up, you can really hash things out in the brain and see them. And so a great resource. I mean, and to that end, what are your most controversial or navigated topics for those of us that want to dive into the great areas? We see your pins, but are there any other areas, must-see areas in your brain? The election's a great area for people to chomp on in your brain. Any other areas that we should pay attention to and go to online after the session today?
Good. Well, as long as you're asking. So my favorite thought, probably the one I care a lot about, is this one: contrarians who make or made sense. And this is where I put people, some of whom are still alive, and I've met, many of whom are long dead, people who saw the world a different way, who understood this thing I call relationships. And one of the most controversial, whom I almost never mention, is Alice Miller, who was a Swiss psychotherapist who helped invent family systems therapy and the things like the repetition compulsion, that basically that trauma, basically trauma is much more prevalent than we think it is. In fact, we have institutionalized the infliction of trauma in our pedagogy, that our schools, and this, Alice Miller's thinking in this line marries up beautifully to 6 other thinkers who are on this list about education, from John Taylor Gatto to John Holt to Grace Llewellyn. They're all in here talking about education. But here she says, look, we've actually designed a system that will create very obedient people. And in one of her books, she talks about how Germany was perfectly prepared for Hitler, partly because of how they were educating their children. They were educated to be obedient and obey authority. So there's a whole lot of stuff in here under Alice Miller and a bunch of other places. But this is sort of the harder kinds of topics to talk about. And I follow, for example, well, let me see where I go. Da, 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 da.
And I love that you get all the data support, because these harder topics, these complex, evocative, controversial topics, you need all the information there to kind of formulate and triangulate. So I can imagine this is a very interesting area, and I imagine very compelling. We have a lot of students and educators too. I think we'll go ahead and tweet out that particular link in that area as well. There's a lot to digest there.
So here, I should attach here, we don't trust you to tell you what really happened. So way back when, in the 80s, there was a movement toward repressed memories, and people were starting to come out and say, hey, I'm suddenly having flashbacks of what happened to me as a child. There was an immediate invention of false recovered memory syndrome. And a very quick, so I've got this under backlash. Basically, there's backlash against the idea that we might do that. And if you look under backlash, you'll see a lot of stuff here as well. That's the kind of thing you can sort of find and remember. And as I'm traveling through this, explaining it to you all, I'm realizing I need to do a little bit of gardening in these different areas. And I'm doing a little bit as we're talking. So go ahead, next question.
All right, great. Well, actually, since you mentioned gardening, a couple people have asked about your best practices for gardening and editing a brain and how you manage all the links. And then as part of that question, Alicia was asking more about your editorial choices as far as how you decide what is parent, child, or jump. And she noted the metals section. I think she said the alloy. She was thinking it should be more of a child or a parent. So maybe you can talk a little bit about gardening, your best practices, and how you decide parent, child, or jump, getting back to those foundational relationships that you're creating.
Great insights. So first, I'm pretty anal about spelling and initial caps. So most everywhere you'll see I use initial caps. I also put nouns in their plurals. So I don't have horse, I have horses. And I do that kind of everywhere. It just makes it easier to find stuff in the end. And also, once you've screwed up the namespace, it's really hard to use your brain. You won't be able to find stuff anymore. So early on, I noticed that there was a feature in the brain that would let you crawl a website. It would create a thought for every page in the website, pulling up automatically the name of that page and so forth. Never, ever wanted to do that because I won't know how many pages came in and what they all look like. And by the time I get through cleaning them up, I probably will have missed a whole bunch of them. So then the next thing is, where do I put things? And I decided that authors write books, so that the books are their creations. So I put the books under the authors. But I decided that actors act in movies. And so they are actors. So I put all actors under their movies. So here's Brad Pitt. He was in Mr. and Mrs. Smith, Inglourious Bastards, Ocean's 11, Seven, et cetera, et cetera. And so he's a husband and wife with Angelina Jolie. They're known as Brangelina. Brangelina, of course, is under single-name couples along with Dick and Liz and Tomcat. Oops, Tomcat has a breakup. They're all under single-name celebrities like Cher and Madonna. Back to Brad. And then Ocean's 11, for example, has a prequel, which is it's a remake of Ocean's 11 shot from 1960, which featured the Rat Pack: Dean Martin, Frank Sinatra, Peter Lawford, Sammy Davis Jr., all these people who were in the 60s. So all that seems pretty natural because they're contained by the things that I was just going up into. And every now and then I make a bad call, and I'm not a chemist or a metallurgist, so I am positive that if you go into the section of my brain about genetics and CRISPR and alloys and what have you, that I've made all sorts of blunders. And one of my big regrets is that the brain is not a more collaborative tool where I could learn from other people's brains and we could be in conversation over this brain so that somebody wise in the areas where I've screwed up can say, hey, you really probably mean this instead of that. I remember I use yin and yang as a metaphor a lot when I speak, and the first time I did that 20 years ago in a speech, a young woman walks up to me afterward and says, I think you mean that yin is the feminine, is the masculine? Because I had flipped them. Wasn't even thinking, hadn't gone and looked. That kind of conversation could and should be happening over and over and over again, and I wish it happened more. So then the last thing that the question triggered was, there's a mental threshold function that I always have about, do I want to put something in the brain? Because it's going to mess up the namespace. Adding something has the cost of making the namespace more crowded. So I'm trying to meet two thresholds. One is, do I want to remember it later? And the other one is it going to be useful for everybody else who might be visiting my brain as I publish it? And so if it passes those thresholds, I put it in. I don't put every email in. I don't put, for example, if a person recommended a book, I don't put that recommendation in. But if a person was highly inspired by that book, if, Atlas Shrugged or The Fountainhead inspired countless people, God bless them, they'll be under it. There'll be, people influenced by Ayn Rand or whatever else. That I put in. So there's also a threshold of how essential is that link or relationship or item to remember in the long run. And the who told me to go read this book is not, to me, important enough, but, who was deeply influenced by it totally is.
Great, and that's getting. Roland had a question. I know the answer to this, but let's pose it for the group. Do you work in a team to develop your brain, which would disqualify you from being the largest singly produced brain by a single individual? But I'll let you answer. And how would that change things? What would be good best practices for the collaborative brain? I guess I'll let you answer. Who's your team of thought editors, Jerry?
It's me, basically. Yeah. I wish I could be collaborating with people through it. That's sort of where I have a thought here called brain futures that I'm showing you. And I believe, actually, that we are all weaving a global brain, and Wikipedia is a nice example of it, of a bunch of people collaborating to create curated context so that everybody can use it and learn something and make it better. So I think we're busy weaving a global brain in lots of different ways, including some ways that are much more spiritual and less about software. So at this point, it's me, and every thought in my brain, I don't know that any other human has ever put a thought in my brain. So it's kind of me just sort of whacking away at it. If you do the numbers, it's 20 or 30 things a day over 18 years.
All right, great. And I guess that's a nice segue into Willie's question, and we love, and that's where, feedback from all users is fabulous. We do work closely with Jerry, and we're working on some stuff with Brain 9. His brain is always our benchmark for engineers to make sure how fast does it run, and if it's not running fast in Jerry's brain, we got to re-architect the software or do something different. So on a development end, we have to thank and give Jerry credit for that and for making his brain accessible to us as developers. But you've talked about a few futures. Willie has a question. Looking into the future and all that we do not know yet, can you still elaborate on how you would like to see the brain evolve despite the constraints that you may have now in using the software?
Yeah. Well, years ago, there was an API to the brain, so outsiders could program things, and I think the brain could access other databases and map them or represent them in a brain structure. At least I wish there was sort of APIs again, but it would be lovely if the whole thing were open so that we could all riff on how this thing works and more collaborative. That's kind of my deep wish, because I feel like I'm one of the few people on Earth getting the big lesson that context is essential, and that sharing what we know, this collaborative sense-making thing, really, really matters. Yeah, and so I'm just going to collaborative sense-making in my brain. And this feels sort of civilization level important to me.
Very nice. And there have been a lot of questions, Jerry, about do you incorporate files, and do you use the brain as a file manager? Somebody also asked if you use it for to-dos. We do have these features, but Jerry has a unique perspective on what and how he uses the brain, and so I'm going to let Jerry answer what he does or doesn't do with files in his brain.
Yeah, sometimes I link to local files, so you can easily create a link to a file on your Finder or Explorer, your local directory. That works just fine. I don't do that much, partly because I'm trying to avoid creating local files. So mostly I use Google Docs for things, so I will put a bunch of Google Docs links in. And I don't do to-do lists, nor do I do a calendar in my brain. But I do projects and related documents to that project, although I will confess that between creating folders in Google Drive and trying to map them up to what's happening in my brain, I'm probably not as anal retentive at that as I am about other sorts of things related to my brain. And then I don't use the notes field very much. I use it some. For example, for mergers and acquisitions, I always write in the notes field, this company bought this company for this much on this date, and then when it happens 3 or 4 times over again, then I have the historic record right there. That's kind of cool. But I don't copy and paste a lot of text into the brain. I want the brain, because I knew immediately that my brain, if a software could stand it, was going to get really big, and I didn't want it to get really clumsy. So I turned off the feature that copies all the web pages and indexes them, because I didn't feel like I needed that, and I don't feel like I'm doing full text search into all the documents I've ever touched or added to my brain, so I don't do that. I think those are interesting calls, and you might well use them in very different ways. And I tried at one point to do both a to-do list and an outline for an article in my brain, and I found that the brain was better for the context and not the to-dos. Like, I was better off on Trello or some other place to actually manage the items of things I was going to do that day.
All right, great. And, this is why we have Jerry presenting. It's a whole other perspective. We could put somebody else on, like Omar, who's a big tag and type and file management person. So I think really kind of finding the space in your life that makes sense. But I think the thing that is so compelling about Jerry's example is because at the heart of it and the start of the brain, all the brain innovation is really about visualizing linkages and connections, and that's what this brain signifies well. And to that end, Wesley was actually asking, is the thought to link ratio significant to you? And I'll just say, for somebody who looks at a lot of brains professionally, it is significant, and Jerry's thought to link ratio is high because he's a connector and he's got a lot of stuff connected to single thoughts. And again, that's an editorial choice. I've seen other brains that are almost hierarchical with just parent-child and no more than 10 child thoughts linked below. And it really just depends how expansive and how many connections you want as an individual in that brain. I think it's the amount of connections in Jerry's brain, to me, invokes my imagination and stimulates me intellectually. So I like seeing this. You may not want to have, 30 or 40 thoughts linked below or around. You might want to just have 5 or 6, and that's fine too. So I don't know, Jerry, if you find that you experience any threshold of limits to how you've got too many links around an active thought, or if you concern yourself with that, how you manage your thought to link ratio, I guess.
So I think I found the design of the brain really elegant from the start, and then I adapted some of my behavior to the brain structure, which means that, as I said earlier, when a thought gets kind of crowded, the first thing I do is I create a thought called articles about. Right? So here's an articles about my brain, for example. And that helps me manage complexity. So here's actually articles about the brain. Like I said, I don't have that many here. Here's the brain, the product, et cetera, et cetera. And then, if you love these things way back when, Echo, Hypercard, Inspiration, Lotus Agenda, and more, you'll probably love the brain. I saw one person's brain once that went very laterally. They were using jump thoughts for almost everything, and it totally threw me. I was like, wow, I couldn't do that. That would totally break my brain. And so I think what's happened is there's been this really nice adaptation between how I see the world and what the tool is able to do, which I've then kind of just plugged into and been very happy with. So even when I get to a really crowded screen, like that jobs and automation screen, which has tons and tons of stuff, I know there's tons of stuff there, but I also know that there's more wheat than chaff by far, because most of the chaff isn't making it into my brain. And as much as I can, I'm sort of subcategorizing and trying to add texture, or maybe more importantly, I also create nuggets, create smaller insights for the things inside of documentaries and books and speeches and whatever else. So it isn't just that I have a link to the book or the movie, it's that if the movie said people are born good, then it's connected to that thought along with all the other pieces of evidence or dramatizations of that notion. And that's really important. So I tend to overlink, in particular overlink up, because, and this goes back to another early question, how do you get your brain around this fact that this is not a hierarchy or a sort of a normal outline? You have to forget that in an outline there's like one thing above and then you keep splitting down below. You can link up to anything and do that. And what happens to me is there'll be a reason why I have to look something up in my brain and I won't find it right away, like skeptical of. And I'll be like, that's troubling. Why did I not find it? So at that moment, I start pinning in my head, what did I first try to do to find it? And then by the time I find it, which usually happens, I then correct it. I add more links, or I change the wording, or I do something so that the next time this thing happens, I will find it. Or the next time somebody else is looking for it, they're more likely to find it. And again, I'm not a librarian or classification or data architecture expert. I'm not a metallurgist. I'm none of these things. I'm just an amateur who's curious about a lot of stuff, who decided that this tool perfectly suited my need to remember what I had seen. That's it. It's really not much more than that. So my brain is not complete. It's not authoritative. It totally reflects my political point of view about why we do what we do and what my politics are. All those things are there to be seen. And I love that. And that's why publishing it is also something I love, because I'm hoping to run into more people who will help me feed the brain, who will push back and say, well, I think you're wrong about this and this. Have you considered this evidence? Whatever it might be. And the tool itself doesn't make room for that conversation right now. So all of that happens out of band. I get the occasional email. I was just on the thought, people I've met through my brain, these are all people, these are mostly people who sent me a note saying, hey, I noticed you're publishing your brain, or you're a brain user. Can we talk?
Great. And, when you think about it, it's a very bold and somewhat courageous thing to do, to publish literally all your beliefs. I think a lot of us, we'll have a belief section, but putting it out there on the internet for thousands of people to navigate each day, that's a pretty cool thing to do. And, it's thanks again for sharing that. And it is very personal. You will get a sense of Jerry's personality and his beliefs when you navigate through this brain, for those of you that haven't been there. And I think that personalization aspect of the brain, when you start putting in, stuff that keeps you up at night, this guy said something on the news, it's really irking me, let me work it out in the brain. Those are the kinds of things that become your sticky points and really help you, in some sense, bond with the technology and make it become more of a reflection of what's going on in your head, in your wet brain. Now I do...
Can I follow up on that just for a second?
Yes.
There's a really important point here, which is there's two things that made the brain really work for me. One is, and this is the reason I don't use tags and types, it was really easy to add new information. It didn't take a whole bunch of steps. And the second is, nobody at the Brain was telling me how to put authors in their books, where to put actors in their movies. I had to figure that out. And that means that I had to appropriate this tool to my uses and then be disciplined on my side about how I used it. So both of those things were very, very joyful for me. And I think that all too often we create these mega databases, and then it's really easy for a database to get more and more fields, and then every time you add an observation or a thing, suddenly you have to fill out 12 fields. You're not going to add anything. You're just going to stop using it. So there's this threshold. I wrote a post a long time ago called the law of convenience that says that every additional click that it takes to get some little thing done dramatically reduces the likelihood you're going to try to do that thing. So here, I think, where does it go? I find it. I drag the link in, cross my fingers, and hope that the brain picks up the name and the URL properly. If it does, my job is 80% done. If it doesn't, I clean it up a little bit. That's pretty quick. And I can do all that in 30 seconds or a minute for something I'd like to remember. That's really interesting and useful. Sorry to interrupt you, Shelley, but
no, that's great.
That's a point I really wanted to make.
Yeah, and that's an important point, speaking to digital memory and the ability to have the brain become that reflection. And actually, the only point I wanted to make is I want to be sensitive to your time, Jerry, and to everyone else's time. And yes, a lot of you have asked, is this going to be recorded? We are recording. We will publish the recording. We can go for another 5-10 minutes, but I want to be sensitive to your time, Jerry. Shall we continue going in overtime, or the questions? Well, there's going to be no shortage of questions. At some point, we'll have to, cut things off. So how are we doing from time on your end? And also for the attendees that do need to leave on the hour, we understand it's 15 minutes past the hour. The rest of this session, however long we continue, will be recorded as well.
Let's do one more question, and I do need to get back to my day as well. But also,
right.
The longer this recording is, the less people are going to go look at it later. So I'd love to make it handy for them.
Okay, very good. Jack had a question about book resumes and language learning. It is kind of one of the last questions, so maybe we'll end the note on that. And then just finally, any other words of wisdom or closing notes for people who you've no doubt inspired today on our session.
So what's the specific question?
He was wondering if you have anything about book resumes or language learning. in your brain?
So yes, kind of. And by book resumes, I assume you mean things like Cliff Notes and so forth, which I have as well. But you're prompting something else, which I just want to mention. So here's book summaries, Cliff's Notes, Philosopher's Notes, Spark Notes also, Shrinklets, Twitterature. So yes, I've got something about book summaries, but not an awful lot. And then there's a bunch of stuff about learning languages, including different methodologies and lots of products like Linguanaut and LiveMocha and LearnJ and all those kinds of things. But the book summaries thing brings me to something else that I like to do, but I haven't done as much of as I want to, which is something I call the 5-minute university. And if all of us did this and published it on YouTube or wherever, we wouldn't have to read so many books. So the 5-minute university notion, I think I've got it as a contraction as well. Here we go, 5-minute university. I did one, for example, on the book The Great Transformation by Karl Polanyi, which is one of my favorite books. And what I did was, in 5 minutes, tell you, whoever comes by and sees this thing, what I got from the book. And most people got from this book the double movement, which is the last thing I talk about. I don't care so much about the double movement. I got a whole bunch of other great stuff, which you can see here in my debrief about the Great Transformation into my book. So, ways we used to live before the market economy, about market society, substantivism, a whole bunch of stuff. That Robert Owen was the only economic thinker who understood what actually happened, and Robert Owen is the inventor of socialism. Anyway, so I think if we all recorded 5-minute universities of the books we've really cared about and put our points of view out there more, then each of us wouldn't be staring at this insanely tall stack of things to read, documentaries to watch, movies to digest, etc. And we could then collaborate on making this sort of sense-making environment really, really rich. And we could disagree. And one of the reasons I like my brain and I want to meld it with others, but I don't have a desire to agree with a dozen or 12,000 people on what the next thought should be named and where it's going to go. I want to be able always to put things into my context and then share them and compare them, and I will change my context if so influenced by others whose structure makes more sense. But I think that we don't really want to squeeze things down to one point of view. This conflict of points of view and the rubbing together of different ways of seeing things is hugely important, which is why sorry, let me go to one of the more important thoughts in my brain also is called "What if we trusted you?" And it's linked to "We don't trust you." So I keep a compendium of why we don't trust you to design the spaces you'll occupy, to do what you'll say you'll do, to drive carefully, to get your work done well, to minister to one another, et cetera, et cetera. And all of these things are buried in where, we don't trust you to minister to one another. I learned from the Quakers. And here's George Fox, the founder of the Quakers and also one of my contrarians. And when Quakers get together, if none of them stands up and says something, there will be no ministry to anybody. As opposed to, we pay somebody so that every Sunday they come up with a clever essay to motivate us to be better humans. That's interesting, right? And in fact, I should link this to sermons. And so I've just made a link to sermons in contrast. And vocal ministry is actually an aspect of Quaker process. So I'm actually going to connect this up to "We don't trust you" too. And there we go. I just made a little bit cleaner representation of what I meant. So this process, if we could do it out loud with each other, I think is a great thing. And again, and I think I'll end with this, it boggles me. It absolutely boggles me that nobody seems to care that these sorts of tools aren't generally available and that we're not all doing this. And instead, we're worried about how big Donald Trump's hands are. And I'm not that worried about that, by the way.
Great. And this whole sense-making notion, and it really makes you understand that the multi-dimensional nature of information, we need to reflect on that. We need to capture that, and that's one of the things I do love about your brain, these different perspectives and the dimensions that we're seeing. So I want to thank you for that. And Jerry, if people do want to reach out to you, we will of course tweet and include in your thank you notes links to Jerry's Brain on the internet. I want to remind everyone, if you're on iOS, you can download Jerry's app on iTunes, and we're happy to share whatever contact information. I know you're readily accessible on Twitter to people, Jerry, but if you have any other contact information or web pages, you can let us know, or how people can follow up with you on any questions to your brain.
Thank you. I'm easy to find. You can friend me on LinkedIn, or if you do friend me on LinkedIn, say why, say where you found me, because I don't sort of connect to other random requests. But I'm on Twitter. My email is sociate@gmail.com, so SOCIATE, and happy always to engage with people who are curious about these questions. And thank Harlan, thank you guys for bringing the brain to the world and keeping it alive, because this is actually a genuinely important piece of software.
All right. Well, thank you, Jerry. Great. Thank you for sharing your brain, and we'll look forward to diving in after the session. And we will have the recording. And for those of you that are just getting started and don't know how to begin, join us tomorrow for the Brain 101. That's every Friday at 10 a.m. Pacific, where we start from scratch. So even if you're on your first thought, we'll hopefully give you some good advice on how you get to 288, and then you can also look at Jerry's online. And I think with that, we're going to close the session today. Thanks again, Jerry, for all the advice and sharing, and hopefully we can do this again sometime, and we'll look forward to more advice and seeing your brain evolve to 400,000 thoughts as the years and everything else happens. And we're just getting a lot of thank you. Your presentation rocks. Thank you, and lots of thank yous in the Q&A that I'll pass over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for your time. Really appreciate your being here.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.